in failing forward. If you make a mistake, you just have to quickly move past it and not dwell on it, because now you're thinking about the past. You're not going to be present. So you're not going to have as good of situational awareness as you need to be. And you've got to be able to shake that off and move forward and stay positive to get a better result. You have to practice doing hard things to be able to continue to do hard things.
This is Andrew Vance, and you're listening to Choose the Hard Way, where my guests share stories about how doing hard things builds stronger, more resilient, happier people. This marks the 50th episode of Choose the Hard Way, and I want to say thank you to everyone who listens to the show and shares it with their friends. Honestly, when I started out 3 years ago, I had no idea there'd be such an overwhelming response to Choose the Hard Way, or that it would get this big. Thanks for listening. Thanks for helping Choose the Hard Way to grow, and I'm excited to keep growing the show with your help. If you enjoy this episode, please give it a 5-star rating on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It only takes a second, and I really appreciate the support. Subscribe to the show and forward it to a friend who likes doing hard things. If you'd like to suggest a guest or be in touch, you can reach me at choosethehardway@gmail.com or at hardwaypod on Twitter or Instagram. My guest is Casey Glass. Casey is a strength and conditioning coach who works with special operators in the United States military, including special operators preparing to screen for Tier 1 units, the most elite military units in the world. Casey got her start working in collegiate strength and conditioning for Olympic sports before shifting to work with tactical athletes. We talk about training and stress management techniques from the world of special operations that anyone can use to improve mental and physical performance in work, in life, and in sport to keep doing hard things. Normally, I would steer you to a guest's social media accounts or website. While Casey graciously shares her knowledge in this interview, due to the nature of her work, you won't find her on the internet.
We've really only been around in the tactical world as strength and conditioning coaches, dietitians, sports psychologists for 10-ish years, maybe 10 to 12 years. And all of us have sport backgrounds. So everybody spent at least 5 years up to 10 years working with a high-level sports team. So that can be Olympic, professional, or the collegiate realm. And the same thing is true for the dietitians and for the sports psychologists. So we all made this leap into the tactical field and had to learn the world from the ground up and then determine how we were going to take our backgrounds and our education and adjust it so that it fits the need of this community, which is very, very different.
Yeah, so I think that's another interesting area to explore. In what ways are the worlds of high performance in sport and the worlds of high performance with tactical professionals similar or different when it comes to strength and conditioning and mental training as well?
So similar in the sense that the basics are always going to remain consistent across the board, and they're going to remain important. So the better you are at the basics, whether that's mental performance or physical training and athleticism, just having consistency with the basics is going to be what we do with college freshmen, college seniors, professional sports, and Olympians. But in a sports environment, besides the time that they're on the field dealing with other bodies or the court dealing with other bodies, everything is so predictable. You know their schedule, their practice schedule, their game schedule. If they're in school, you know their class schedule. You know when they're in the training room, you know their meal times. You can tell them what to eat, and they're going to, well, maybe not college students aren't going to eat it, but in professional sports, you may have some very compliant athletes in the nutrition realm, and everything is very structured, scheduled, and predictable. And in our environment, which isn't the same with all special operations units, but in our environment, I don't know who's coming in to train that day. I don't know how long they're going to be in town. These are questions I have to ask them when I see them. How long are you here? Where are you going next? How long are you gone? I don't know what the food is like where they're going necessarily. They may not know, or they may be in charge of bringing their own food. We're not going on deployment with them. We don't go on all their training trips with them. So we don't get to see every single ounce of training, especially for that individual and what they're doing. They're traveling all over the country, all over the world. So we tend to work more as consultants within our unit. We don't have group workout times. It's kind of a free-for-all problem-solving fest, I would say, with a lot of independence on the operator's part. So our goal is as much education as we can get when they're local and they're in front of us, and how can we help them solve their current problems, and then project down the line 2 or 3 weeks until we can see them again, or sometimes 3 months, 6 months. Who knows when you're going to see them again. Sometimes I don't see them for so long that I actually forget their names, and then they come back and it's like, oh, you're still here. Let's pick up where we left off 8 months ago.
And why did you become interested in the world of strength and conditioning, and what led you into that profession?
So I worked really hard as a soccer player. I, in my youth, maybe 8th grade, 7th grade, went to soccer camp, and one of the coaches said, hey, if you want to make it to college, then you need to practice every day. So I did. And then I played on a team where all the girls were older than me. So it was an under 19 team. They were all in high school. I was still in junior high. I was 12, I think, when I played with that team. So they got to go to high school practice. And I was with them on the club team. So I didn't get to go to high school practice. So I had kind of an off season, and I just started going to the YMCA with my mom and figuring out how the machines worked and running on the track while she was doing her workout. And then when I got into high school, I got a little bit of education from a coach on weight training and just kept doing it. And then when I got to college, so I played soccer at TCU, Texas Christian, and I wasn't the best skilled player by any means, but I was one of the more athletic ones. At one point, I could jump the highest on the team. I could sprint the fastest. I was not the fittest. But I could lift the heaviest. So I really leaned into that and spent some extra time in the weight room and paid really close attention to what my strength coaches said, so that I could use my athleticism as an edge to get playing time, which worked. And then I was simultaneously interning with the strength coach and babysitting for a personal trainer. So between those two things, I discovered that was my senior year of college, that I wanted to do something in that realm. And I told the strength coach that I was interning with, who had been my strength coach, that I was thinking about either strength and conditioning or personal training. So personal training is one-on-one, usually general population, not athletes. And then strength and conditioning is usually teams and athletes. So the education is a little bit different and the jobs can be very different. And he told me, Casey, you'll kill someone if you're a personal trainer. So you need to work with athletes. So I came from the collegiate world. I spent 2 years at Purdue as a graduate assistant strength coach. So I was working with a lot of different sports there while I was getting my master's. And then I went to University of Arkansas, and I worked there for almost 5 years. Again, with a myriad of sports. When you work with Olympic sports, which is the term for basically every sport but football. So any sport you would find in the Olympics, you get a lot of exposure to a lot of different sports. So I've worked with divers and cheerleaders. I've worked with football, baseball, basketball, worked with golf, which is very helpful because you've got to learn. I don't play all those sports. I played soccer. I played one sport. So you have to go to the practice. You've got to learn the sports. You have to talk to the coaches, the athletes, and learn all about it, and then bring your expertise to the table on how you can help them in the weight room.
How does a 12-year-old end up on a soccer team with high school kids? That's the thing that jumped out at me in that series of anecdotes. Small town, one club team. So the talent is spread kind of thin. Okay. And was that your decision? Were you a really driven kid?
Oh yeah. Once I knew you had to practice every day, you want to go to college, that was okay. I need to play for the hardest team I can get on. I'm going to practice every day. There were times in high school. So you have club season and you have high school season. In club season in soccer, in the soccer world, that's the serious one. Scouts don't come to high school games. High school is just for fun. Club sports is where it's at for real training, a solid talent pool, and college recruitment. So after high school practices, I would just tell my mom to pick me up an hour later because the practices weren't hard enough. So I would just stay and practice for another half hour and then do my own conditioning for another half hour. And by then it's dark and raining usually because it's winter. So yeah, I had a goal. I wanted to play soccer in college, and I was going to get there from a small town one way or another. So I actually had to leave that under 19 team in my town and go play in the big leagues, so to speak. So I'm from Texas, small town, south of Dallas. So I knew if I wanted to go to college, I had to play soccer in Dallas because my dad broke the news one day. Like, you're going to have to leave your friends if you're serious about this and go play for one of these Division I club teams up in Dallas. And I made it. Once again, not the most skilled player on the team, usually the worst skilled player on every club team I was on at that point, but some of the best teams in the state and in the country. So yeah, my dad and I, or my mom and I, had to drive an hour and a half to get to practice and to get to games. So that was like 3 or 4 days a week. And they committed to it and I committed to it. And then on days I didn't have practice, I would lift weights, I would run, do my skill practice, whatever it took to try to catch up, because those kids in the big city were better than I was.
Did you get everything out of your competitive soccer career that you wanted to get out of it?
I would say no. We really struggled, the team that I was on. Not how I wanted that to go. Freshman year, we were pretty good, and then just not good. So it was very frustrating after that, especially because we were working so hard. But the other girls were great, and the school was great. But yeah, I definitely wanted that to go a little bit better. I knew we weren't going to win every game necessarily. They're actually really good now at TCU. But it was still worth the work, because even though we weren't winning, everything just kept getting harder. You know, club practices in Dallas were harder than club practices in Corsicana, where I grew up. And then college practices, college games, travel schedule, everything got harder and harder, which I liked because it builds that discipline. And if I hadn't had that, I wouldn't have made it as a strength coach, because when you're starting out in strength conditioning, you're working 13 hours a day and you're going to grad school. At night, you're working weekends. Like, it's tough working in that collegiate environment, especially when you first break in. So even though collegiate soccer wasn't as fun as I wanted it to be and we weren't as successful, it really helped pave the way for everything else I had to do after that. Just you have to practice doing hard things to be able to continue to do hard things.
And when you think about those experiences today, whether it was as an athlete or once you went into strength and conditioning, working with athletes in sports, not tactical professionals, and you think about what you're doing today, what did those experiences do that help you be good at what you're doing today, or help you relate to the tactical professionals that you're working with?
So first, when it came to training my student athletes, it helped me set the bar really high for them, because the bar was set really high for me and for my team by my college coaches. And I'll never forget, the one thing that stood out the most is when we're doing sprints, you think you're sprinting through the line. You think you're finishing the drill, but if you weren't sprinting full speed when you cross that line and a couple yards past, we had to go again. We had to go again. We had to go again. And that just became this metaphor for everything. Like, you have to do more than just finish. You have to keep going and push harder. And then that was a trait that I taught every collegiate athlete that I trained after that. I held them to that same standard that my coach held me to. And that's something that I believe helped make them successful. And now, like, from the soccer team that I coach, I think 3 of them are doctors now. Like,
wow,
they went far. My volleyball girls, I had an entire senior class end up playing professionally all over the world. And I think those little lessons that were taught to me that I was able to pass on to them helped in some way. And then now with these athletes, I don't have to teach them that, because they do that way better than I ever did. So I actually get to relax a little bit and just focus on the science and the periodization and the relationships, because the motivation is already there. They don't need a motivation coach
it can cut both ways, right? You can be undermotivated, and that can be to your detriment. Like you said, you have to sprint all the way through the finish line, whether it's an actual sprint or with whatever you're doing. You have to put out all the time at the highest level. What if someone has so much motivation that they can't actually shut it off? And, because I've certainly encountered this with a lot of different professionals in a lot of different domains that I've come into contact with, whether it's sports, the arts, whatever the case may be, where people who have that capacity, like a gear higher than even other high achieving people, it can be difficult for them to shut it off when they need to, or they can just push themselves too hard all the time, including in training. Is that something where you have to intervene ever?
That's the majority of what I do now. I don't want to use the term demotivator because I don't want to demotivate them, but I want them to just learn a little bit more about the science of training and recovery so that they still feel like they're pushing themselves and optimizing their training, but they are leaving enough in the tank that they can recover and not doing anything detrimental. Because to them, if they don't suffer, they didn't get anything out of it, but that's just not the way to optimize your training. So they always want to go from a scale of 1 to 10, they always want to go to 11. And I spend many hours a day trying to convince them to go to an 8 and leave a little bit in the tank for the next day so they can recover and come back again, and trying to get them thinking long-term and to kind of switch off from training harder to now training smarter.
Do you have a system, or like, there are any specific principles that you draw upon when you're working with these tactical professionals?
I'm heavily influenced by postural restoration. I don't know if you're familiar at all with that, but it's a system, framework for how to look at the body and how it moves and how people can get stuck in patterns, which can sometimes lead to pain. So if somebody has pain and is stuck in that pattern, then that's when I'm going to intervene with some of these techniques. And then I use a little bit of that framework just to keep guys moving well. Outside of that, I'm pretty open to anything. I've tried a lot of different things through my career and tried to apply different principles, and even, if you want to call them different systems, with different operators, depending on what they're working on. I have also been heavily influenced by Jack Daniels. So he's a track coach. He's got a running book that was suggested to me by another coach in special operations. And that's really, really helped me improve my programming for guys that are doing some distance training or races. So those are the two, I guess, main models or influences. Other than that, I just like to keep learning systems and keep getting more and more influences, and then just seeing if it realistically fits within the tactical population and their needs.
I'm going to put a link to your appearance on the Building the Elite podcast in the show notes for this show. One of the things that you talked about sounded like some of the trainees you work with have a deficit of really basic aerobic training, like what we would call zone 1, zone 2 in cycling. And it sounds like you almost are prescribing the MAF method, Phil Maffetone, like a lot of just very low intensity, and then ramping that up over time so people have a very strong aerobic base. Is that something that you find that a lot of people, because they're going so hard all the time, are actually lacking that aerobic base?
Yeah, a lot of them have just skipped it, and they've done very well. You can improve and you can do well training in zone 3, 4, and 5, but sometimes they get stuck there because that's what they've been doing for so long. So we just look at what they haven't done and we go back and do that. For a lot of these guys, zone 2 just feels too easy, and it's like painfully slow because you got to think about it. Everything in their life and everything they do, they're door kickers, they're hard chargers. So the idea of just getting them to slow down in any capacity, even if that's just like, hey, just take a walk to clear your head and breathe through your nose, or do some meditation or wind down before bed. That's tough for them because the environment they work in is polar opposite. It's go, go, go all the time. Your mind has to be tracking on 3 or 4 different things. You're constantly putting out fires. So that zone 2 work fits into that. It's frustratingly slow and easy for them. So you have to explain and teach them and show them the value in that. Luckily, they see improvement in zone 2 pretty quickly. So I think that's why they stick with it and buy in. But they're definitely frustrated with me for the first couple of weeks of any run program.
I'd love to go deeper into this. What is the role of breathing as it relates to performance?
Man, it has so many connections, which I think is why it's kind of hard to introduce to people because, I mean, obviously we all breathe. If you're upright and moving around and, you're breathing okay. But there are some ways to think about that or maybe train or change that a little bit so that you can just use it as a stronger tool. So in performance, the first layer that I like to train is the biomechanics of diaphragmatic breathing because rib cages can get very stiff. And if rib cages are stiff, especially in populations that lift weights or sprint or do anything fast and aggressive, then rib cage can't expand to allow the lungs to fully expand. And if rib cage can't compress, then it's not going to be really as efficient as it could be at exhaling, blowing off CO2, which is important for gas exchange so that you can improve your athletic performance. And then bonus, if the rib cage can pump, it can expand 360 degrees and compress 360 degrees when it needs to. That's also going to loosen up the shoulders, loosen up the hips, and just give you this sort of like systemic gain in your movement options, movement variability. So you've got improved gas exchange, which will manifest as I've had guys do something as simple as, okay, lay on the ground. We're going to do these breathing drills where we're going to try to get that rib cage pumping. And then 2 weeks later, they say, basketball is easier for me. I'm breathing easier in basketball. And that's great. That's a fantastic result. Our goal was to improve your shoulder range of motion and decrease your back pain. And we did that. And we got this little bonus out of it. And then if your rib cage is pumping, it's expanding. When you inhale 360 degrees, it's compressing. When you exhale 360 degrees, that's a sign for you to know that your diaphragm and pelvic floor should be moving pretty well if that's happening, which means that now you can increase your parasympathetic activation, which is the key to relaxation. So if you're not able to go through these full breath cycles, that rib cage pump, the diaphragm moving up and down, you can get a little bit stuck more on the side of fight or flight, which can increase anxiety for people. It can cause increase in muscle tension, even have your thoughts a little bit discombobulated or having a lot of thoughts at the same time. So if you can improve this, even the brain slows down, the nervous system relaxes, and the same reason people do meditation or yoga have those opportunities to slow down. So there's a lot of layers to it. And a lot of different techniques. I would just say if your goal is relaxation, you want exhales to be decently long. And if you want to know if you're doing it right, you just check that rib cage, make sure that the upper ribs are expanding 360 degrees. Because there's this concept or verbiage of belly breathing, which as a coach, I don't like at all because I'm not cueing your belly because your lungs aren't down there. We want to check the rib cage. That's where the lungs are actually moving. And the cue to breathe through your belly, it sounds like just move your belly, which if you're just moving your belly, you're just pushing your guts towards your abs, which is how people get hernias. So I think it's a very confusing cue. So I always cue from the rib cage since biomechanically that's what should be moving.
I interviewed Pavel Tsatsouline back in 2009 or 2010. And I remember talking to him about the whole concept of breathing behind the shield. And that was kind of the first time that I was introduced to the idea of diaphragmatic breathing and the idea of bracing the core, meaning kind of keeping it solid and inflated like a tire while you continue to breathe versus drawing your belly button in towards your spine, which is a really common cue. How do you think about bracing the core for people who are training? Let's say they're deadlifting or squatting. Is there any particular cue that you use to keep people safe and effective?
So I imagine it can be pretty individual. So I can just speak through kind of the norms that I see in my population. Those front ribs are usually flared out, and that causes the back to arch and have too much of an arch to the point where it's rigid and we can't really move it very well, and can potentially cause pain. So I'd rather, instead of having this extreme arch, if we're doing a hinge, we're doing a deadlift, I want to see more of a flat back position. And our guys tend to use rectus strategies, and actually not so much internal obliques, sometimes not so much external obliques, transverse abdominis. So when we're on the floor just learning 101 level how we want to change these strategies, I have them do a full exhale until their belly button drops down to their spine. We don't suck it in. It's just a cue to help them finish the exhale. That way I know they're not crunching with their six pack. They're actually pushing all the air out. So that's my kind of twist on that cue. And then I tell them to just keep your belly button somewhat to your spine, or keep your lower abs on, which I refer to as your belly button to your belt line, while you inhale, so you don't totally stretch out your abs and lose your brace. And that'll help you expand to the sides and to the back, which is usually what my population can't do. They can only expand to the front, and they usually do it through the false ribs instead of the upper ribs where we want it. So long exhales to, quote, find your abs, and then keep your abs on the inhale. Hopefully you feel a little expansion in between your shoulder blades. But it's not going to be exactly the same for every person in every population. You got to probably do a little assessment, see what they need.
And so going back to Pavel again, I know in advance of this interview, I sent you this article that Pavel wrote in 2004 that the first time I read it, it kind of stuck with me. It's something I've chewed on for a really long time. And it's definitely, there's this concept that he has of tactical periodization, which is really the idea of near random variation of intensity and volume is how he characterizes it. And he's talking about it in this article in relation to tactical populations that he's trained. As you noted, you kind of have a transient relationship, where it might be a long-term relationship, but you're seeing people who come in the door kind of in a consultative capacity. You're not necessarily programming what they're doing all day, every day, over time. Paradoxically, I think there are a lot of parallels between the manner in which special operators have to train for their jobs that are highly stochastic in terms of like what's going to happen when, how hard they're going to have to go, how much sleep they might have, and people who maybe have really high stress jobs. They might have small children that are waking them up all night, or they might have a noise situation with a neighbor, like whatever the case may be, where even if they're trying to do everything, they're ending exposure to blue light at 7 p.m. They're trying to go to bed at the right time. They're managing HRV. They're still maybe not getting enough sleep all the time. They're waking up tired. And then they might just be going and redlining it at the gym all the time and just ending up in this cycle of fatigue, non-recovery, not getting the results that they want. Again, going back to the Building the Elite podcast that you appeared on, you talked about this concept of auto-regulation, which I know it's not the exact same thing as this idea of waiving the load or tactical periodization. But for people that have that high variability of demands, energy levels, control over sleep, what can they learn from the tactical population when it comes to just trying to stay fit and trying to rest, recover, and try to eat well?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of parallels. The first thing, if you have a season where you can do these things well, you can sleep, you can eat, you can train, you got to really capitalize on those, which in sports would be an off season. And it would last months, but for the rest of us, it might just be like 2 or 3 days. So really commit to doing those things when it's realistic. And then when those things are no longer realistic, your goal is going to be to do the basics really well in the amount that you can recover from. So it doesn't take away from your energy with your kids or your energy for work. And that's the same thing that we do with those guys. And that's where auto-regulation plays in. I might give them, work up to a heavy set of 4. And then if you feel great, do another set. If you don't, do 1 set less. So that's a form of auto-regulation right there. It's just keeping the programming very flexible. And there are some rules surrounding the workout as far as what's most important. And those are the things that you want to get done. And those are the things that you're going to program earlier in the workout. So it creates this sort of tier system. So if it's sprinting, I'm okay if they don't get sprinting done every week. I tell them to set the goal of doing it every other week, because then we can maintain the quality. And then if you can only get 1 lift in, get your big lift in for the day, because that's going to be the one you can load up the most. That's going to be the one you're going to get tissue response, hormone response from. And then if they have time to make it down into their accessories, maybe you only do 2 sets. Maybe I wrote down 5, but you do 2. And then next week you do 4. Look at your energy level. How did you feel through the big lifts, through the sprints at the beginning of the workout, through the big lift? If you still have energy left, go ahead and go into the accessories. And if you don't, you don't. And then on the conditioning side, I give them ranges, hit 10 to 16 rounds of this. So that way, when they're having a great day, we can really capitalize and get that 16 rounds. And if we're not having a great day, we're just going to lightly touch on that quality and get 10 rounds in. So if you can create like a tier system like that and just get in what you can, and don't freak out if you miss that exercise or that workout that week. Just try to get it done once every 3 weeks, and you should be able to maintain your qualities pretty well with the minimal dosage.
What have you learned from working with this population that you didn't know before you started heading down this path?
Ooh, wow. A lot of things. I will say the skill set that I've had to sharpen the most is the psychological side of being a coach. At first, it started out as me assuming that the operators knew XYZ about fitness or physiology, but not all of them played sports in college. Some of them didn't even play sports in high school. So they may have never heard the terminology I was using before, or they were, engaged in making eye contact, but not actually understanding what I was saying. So I learned to ask a lot of questions and figure out what their baseline is. So I make sure that I use the right words, and so that I'm meeting them exactly where they are. And then you've got to figure out their vernacular, because sometimes they would say they want to work on something, and to them that means A, but to me that vernacular means B. So one example is an operator told me that he wanted to improve his speed. So I spent all this time writing 8 weeks of a program where we're going to emphasize short sprints, long rests to work on improving his speed, which to me is 10 to 100 meters. Only to realize afterwards he meant he wanted a faster 3 mile. So that was a waste of time. I had to scrap that conditioning program and start over. So just making sure that they can explain to me what their words mean. And that's just made me a 10 times better coach, because now my conversations with them are so much better, and we're collaborating on building that program together. We're collaborating on helping them get whatever ceiling up that they want to improve upon. It's not like the collegiate environment where I know what you need to work on because we did some evaluations. Your coaches told me specifically, I'm just going to tell you what to do and you're going to do it. I rely heavily on information from them. Where do you train? A home gym? Are you going to be on the road? What kind of injuries do you have? What lifts bother that injury? How much time do you have to even go over these things today? And then, what kind of verbiage do you use? And sometimes they think they need to work on something, but they're actually good at that thing once we test it. So just working together really closely with the operator to make sure that I'm not inserting my bias anywhere, and that it stays focused on them and that we're understanding each other's language. So that psychology piece of coaching has been huge.
part of what you have had to do with the manner in which you're interacting with operators is you've really had to refine your ability to read the situation and the needs of the operators and become an expert learner to respond to the information that you're receiving from them, translate it, and then make a quick diagnosis of what's going to be the most effective prescription in the time that you have in terms of the training program or activities, breathing, whatever the case may be. How have you been able to accelerate the speed of that cycle of being able to do that synthesis faster and more rapidly and more effectively?
So it's kind of become a little more like a script. I've learned the information that I need to give them so they have a starting point, and it makes it easy for them to talk about what their goals are and what they're trying to say, because they're using this fitness vernacular. That's my world. That's not necessarily their background or their world. And that's as simple as I have a whiteboard and I have a vertical jump, this many inches to this many inches, back squat, this weight to this weight, front squat, this weight to this weight. So here's my goals for you. I want you somewhere in these ranges. So let's find out if you're in these ranges or not, versus them just saying, I want to get on a program because I want more structure and I don't know what I need to work on, or I think I need to work on this, because likely they haven't tested that. So we need to have a conversation and probably do some testing to figure out what the truth is, right? Because we have perceptions. Them being hard chargers, they think they need to run, an 18-minute 3-mile. And I can say, actually, for your population, you can run it in 20 minutes and 30 seconds, and that would be great. That would put you, with some of the best operators, or I don't know if most successful is the word, but like they're tactically savvy. They have a good reputation. They get the job done. They don't run as fast as you think they can run, and they're still good at the job. So exploring those beliefs, they come in with a set of beliefs. We have to figure out if those are accurate beliefs. So that's where this script and having that whiteboard really helps out, because you have to learn what's your expectation, what kind of language are you using. Let me show you the actual expectation, and then this is the language that we'll use moving forward so that we're on the same page.
What part of what you're doing do you enjoy the most? That's the exact part, the having to learn people better, because I'm able to build relationships with them in a way that now we're both working on this goal. Like, I'm your coach, but I'm also your cheerleader, and I know you can't do this plan perfectly as written, but now we have some goals, and I know how to support you better than I did my first couple years here, when I would just tell you what I wanted you to do. Now I understand you better. I understand that you got to get up at 5 because you got kids at home. And so after work, you can't stay here for 2 hours and train. You need to get it in and get out of here. So now we're kind of like forming this team of it's your performance team that is surrounding you and trying to help you not just reach these acute physical goals, but just to help you with your career long term, keep you here for 10, 15, 20 years and healthy as long as you want. But the challenge of learning people is probably my favorite part of the job. How have you interfaced with your mentors, other people in your network, to try to upskill your abilities in that domain?
I lean very heavily on our psychologists that we have and all across the country and all of our different groups, and bounce ideas off of them. So they may have a line of operators out the door, but as soon as they get a break, usually the coach or the dietitian or somebody goes in there and we're like, okay, I'm talking to this operator. Maybe you've met them before. This is how that conversation went. What do you think would be better here? And that's where I learned about motivational interviewing, because our psychologist does it, our dietitian does it. So started looking into that. And then I got some resources on that actually from Craig Weller at Building the Elite. So he shared some things with me. And then AO coaching is another another resource that I've started leaning into a little bit, and a lot of it's trial and error, and talking to the other coaches at the other groups, because we're constantly troubleshooting for our population, and chances are somebody else has figured that thing out already. So you just send some text messages, make some phone calls, and hammer out whatever the issue is, because chances are they've come across an operator with that issue, or they've had the same conversations that you're having.
Do you find it to be easier or hard to enter into those conversations? Because I think for some people, saying, hey, I have something to learn here, or there's potentially a better way to do this, can be an uncomfortable feeling. But also that's what people who want to get better at anything do, right? Like they continually put themselves in that vulnerable spot, whether you want to be the best special operator in the world, or the best strength and conditioning coach for special operators, or the best in business, or the best actor, whatever. Like that's what you have to do. You have to get into that spot. And it always kind of sounds like, oh yeah, of course that's what you do. But it can sometimes feel uncomfortable to step into that space. How does it feel for you?
I have no problem with it. I'll reach out to strangers, strangers on the internet, coaches I've never met before. If I see them doing something well or better than me, something I want to improve at, or if I think they have a solution, even if they work in a different field, maybe they work with sport athletes, but it looks like they came up with a solution. I don't have an issue with reaching out to them. I also learned from one of my mentors when I was at University of Arkansas, Jason Beltkamp. He told me there's always something that you can learn from somebody. It's either how to do something or how to not do something. So I think if you just pay attention even to the people you're working with and with your own interactions, there have definitely been times where I've had, working on these conversations with guys and swishing around responses in my head, like, am I going to do response A or response B and see how it goes? Well, sometimes I choose the wrong one, and then you just note that down. Don't do that again. That is not what you do. So just do the same thing with people around you. If you go to a seminar and maybe you don't even like it, okay, well, that's what not to do. And then you go to another seminar and you learn a lot from it, and you can ask whoever put that seminar on. They're usually open to some more specific questions about you and your job and your needs. So if you can keep that relationship going, you can reach out and ask them questions.
What are areas that you're really curious about right now where you want to learn more and get better?
Everything. Postural restoration it's a rabbit hole, and it's really complex. So the way that I like to learn is from other coaches who are smarter than me, that have already figured out how to put it into their systems. And luckily I know a few of those. So it's almost like they're translating it for me. They're translating it from all the research articles and the complicated courses and filtering it out to say, you can use this portion of this in the weight room this way. Pat Davidson, Zach Couples, they do that really well. And since I help guys train for selection, so just seeing how other coaches do that successfully, that's how I got connected with Building the Elite, because that is their focus. So I run a lot of ideas by them and ask them for help on a lot of things, and they'll share their best practices and things that they've learned from other coaches, just how to help these guys train really specifically for something and be successful, even though their jobs are nuts and they can't get all their training sessions in.
How is training for selection different than the needs of other trainees that you might work with?
It's like combine training. We know what most of the tests are, so we just need to take a chunk of time and get really, really good at those things. So that narrows the scope of what we have to train for. Versus the other operators, they need to be a jack of all trades, a little bit good at all of these things, but really master of none. And then if they're going through selection, they're going to shift gears and really heavily focus on a handful of those things. And when everybody they're competing with is also training to the test, it gets very complicated. And 10 seconds on a run can matter. 3 reps of calisthenics can matter when you're trying to beat somebody out that's training possibly the exact same way you are.
What are the most important qualities someone has to have who you're working with that's approaching that training phase when they're training for selection?
I would say openness. openness to training in a way they haven't trained before and accepting advice. Because like we talked about earlier, they're used to just training really hard all the time. And now we have to train incredibly smart because we're going into a very competitive environment, very competitive at a handful of tests. And we want to expose them to some things with nutrition, with mental performance that they just haven't had time to dive into yet. And we've got to convince them to, even though their schedules are busy, to take the time out and to go sit in someone's office they've never sat in with before. And to realize that they don't actually know as much as they think they know about nutrition, or mental performance is probably something different than you think it is. So let's get in there. Let's have a conversation with the coach, do an assessment, and I promise this stuff will help you. But you have to get in there and you've got to have that conversation, and you have to be open and curious to the idea that the way that you've been doing things may have been okay, may have even been good, but there's opportunity to optimize where we might ask you to change.
What's an example of a mental performance strategy that might be new to someone operating in this environment who's now moving into preparing for selection?
So the main two that we talk about are arousal control, which is controlling your physiology. So when you get really amped up, you've got tools to calm yourself down, and breathing techniques are a part of that. Imagery can be a part of that. But actually training for it, not thinking you're just going to go straight on to game day and be good at these tools, but actually accumulating training so it becomes more automatic, and failing forward. If you make a mistake, you just have to quickly move past it and not dwell on it, because now you're thinking about the past. You're not going to be present. So you're not going to have as good of situational awareness as you need to be. And you've got to be able to shake that off and move forward and stay positive to get a better result.
What's the secret to doing that?
Practice it over and over and over again. What does Ted Lasso say? Have the memory of a goldfish. And with these guys, it's like, look, you've all had TBIs. You already sort of have the memory of a goldfish. We're just going to use it in your favor by forgetting the mistakes.
Ted Lasso is actually the secret. We've unveiled it right here today.
Yep.
What about arousal control? Because I'm really curious how you think about it in this context of operators, people preparing for selection. Because, having been a high-level athlete yourself, this is something that I've observed with a lot of the best professional athletes in the world and people who operate at a really high level as amateurs. It's that ability to just like flip the switch when they need to and then down-regulate as rapidly as possible.
So the breathing is the first stop. I'll cover the biomechanics piece, make sure they've got, a warm-up drill that helps get that rib cage pumping so the diaphragm can move effectively. If the diaphragm can move effectively up and down, it'll massage the vagus nerve, which helps calm you down. So then they'll work with the psych and determine what's the best breathing rate for them that they could build a routine around. So if they feel themselves getting amped up, they can do 2 or 3 breaths where their inhale is this long and their exhale is this long. And then on top of that, they might layer that with cue words or imagery. I always think about Happy Gilmore. Think of your happy place. That's imagery. We teach that. Whatever works for the individual, we take the breathing, we staff whatever other arousal control skills on top of that are beneficial to that individual, and it becomes their routine. And let's say they make a mistake and they start to get stressed out about it and it increases their arousal. Now they can use this routine of layered skills to be that goldfish and to bring their heart rate down, bring their respiration rate down so they can control their physiology a little bit better so that they can have better physical and cognitive performance.
When it comes to evaluating the optimal breathing pattern, are you also looking at quantitative measures? Like, are you looking at data around this? Are you looking at HRV responses to certain, like a 4 count breathing in and an 8 count breathing out, or whatever the case may be? Do you look at HRV as a measure to determine what an actual successful strategy is for individuals?
Yeah, so they'll do an assessment with the psychologist, and right now he's using HRV, and then he's about to layer in some capnography, which from one of our other psychologists seems like that may end up being a better, more accurate way to go technology wise, because it tells you a little bit about their gas exchange and how they're regulating there. So whatever tool you have, either one, it'll give you an idea. And then you've got to train it. It's not like, okay, I'm going to inhale 3 seconds, exhale 4 seconds. And as long as I know that, I can go do it right now. No, you need to practice it. You need to train it. Ideally, you're doing it for 20 minutes a day. So the process just becomes more automatic. Your nervous system calms down faster because you've been doing 20 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day. And you've been doing this routine. Whenever you're in a stressful situation, you just practice the same as you would practice a sports skill or a tactical skill.
And I know that the analogy I'm about to make is not the same as perhaps what these operators might encounter in the course of their job or in the course of selection. But when you're putting people through physical training, interval training, for example, do you use the rest periods between sets as an opportunity to practice that down regulation?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely what we want them to do. They're training on their own a lot, so we usually introduce that to them when they're local as a tool that they can use to train. Well, even different positions, like making sure that your rib cage is stacked over your diaphragm so you can breathe a little bit better, a little bit easier. Kind of whatever tools that individual needs, you can absolutely practice it there, and then read your heart rate. Just look at your watch, read your heart rate, and watch it drop. Try some different things and find what things help it drop faster. So that's a great tool to practice because it's hard to go to an environment. I'm going to go to this environment. It's going to really stress me out so I can practice this. It's not as easy to find. So the easiest thing to do is to just use a workout to increase your heart rate and respiration rate, and then use your down regulation tools, your arousal control tools and routine to try to bring that heart rate down as fast as possible.
That really seems like another skill that people who are not tactical professionals could apply in whatever physical training they might have time to do. That, again, it might transpose into the context of your job, for example, whatever that might be. If you like most people are likely to encounter some kind of high stress situation at work at some point or in other domains of their life. And do you think it's the case that working on down regulation and those controlled physical environments, workouts, the intervals between actual work periods can actually transpose that into other contexts if you practice it over time?
Yeah, that's the literature. That's the idea. And it doesn't have to be a workout. That's why people will do cold plunges. Same concept. You hop in that cold water, your physiology will increase, your heart rate will increase, your respiration will increase. So that's another tool that people will use. The more you train it, the more automatic the parasympathetic response becomes. So that's where that 20 minutes a day concept comes from, is you're just training the nervous system, but you can train it the way that you get heart rate and respiration up there. There's different tools that people use. My understanding, and I got this from one of our psychologists, is it's probably a little bit better to do it in a natural way versus maybe just sitting there calmly and hyperventilating. Or some people will use breath holds, which can, my understanding is potentially you, depending on how long you're holding your breath, you may not be getting enough oxygen to your brain. So I would recommend using workouts or a cold plunge first before I would recommend long breath holds or to be your stressor. But there's a lot of different options.
There's plenty of stress out there. Well, Casey, thanks so much for joining me. And I don't know if you want to be found. So if people want to find you, should they not try to do that? Or would you like to be found? And if so, where might they find you?
At this point in time, I do not want to be found, but I appreciate the thought if anybody does want to find me, but not today.
You will not find Casey. Casey is the first guest that you will not find, and we will not say how you can find her. But Casey, thanks so much for joining me today. Thanks for everything that you shared. Really appreciate it. And it's just been great to get to have this conversation with you.
Well, thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
If you have questions, comments, feedback, or want to suggest a guest, please reach out to @HardwayPod on social or email me at choosethehardway@gmail.com. Please take a moment to hit 5 stars in Spotify or iTunes and leave a 1-word review. That helps more people connect with the powerful stories my guests share, and I really appreciate the support. You are what you overcome. Choose the hard way.